All right, good afternoon. I am Saad Al-Aziz, the owner and head instructor of Semper Fortis Jiu Jitsu here in San Antonio, Texas. And I'm going to tackle this week's question of the week, which is somebody asked me for some tips on, how to learn techniques and get better at Jiu Jitsu. And so a couple tips is one, focus on doing the technique slowly. So when your instructor shows you the technique, and then you pair up and you start drilling the technique, focus on doing the technique slowly and perfectly. And what I mean by that is I will watch students get challenged by a technique. Be like, like maybe they're missing a step or they're not getting it quite right. And so what they'll do is they'll try to do the technique faster and harder. And then what they always hear me say in class is don't try to do the technique faster and harder. Try to do the technique perfect, because if you just go faster and harder, you're only going to do the technique incorrectly in a faster way. So take your time, perfect the technique, each step of the technique, and then the more you drill it, the more you'll build up speed. And it's one of the reasons why it's easier in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I have found, to teach smaller people and, some cases females, than it is to teach big, strong, or really athletic people. Because a big, strong, athletic person can come in and, just based on their strength and athleticism, like not get the technique really right and do well against other inexperienced or slightly experienced jiu-jitsu practitioners, just using their size, strength, and athleticism. That helps for sure. Like where a smaller, weaker person, or in the case of a lady, who doesn't have the option of, I'm just gonna bench press this 200-pound man off me. It's like, no, the lady has to get the technique perfect, Otherwise, it's not going to work against a bigger, stronger, more athletic person. Where a person that comes into jiu-jitsu who's big and strong and athletic, a lot of times they can get away with bad techniques, especially in sparring, because they can just sort of cheat with their athleticism. Like we had this guy. He was a young white belt. He came in, and we nicknamed him the Mountain, and because he was like the strongest guy that I'd ever rolled with. He was a professional power lifter, and me and two of the other black belts in here, we'd got to the mount, and this guy literally was able to bench press us off of him. He was just incredibly strong and powerful. So he could get away with bad technique to a degree. Eventually, me and the other black belts caught him, but he was able to just get away with using his strength and athleticism. Where if you come in and you're a slight 110-pound person, you're not going to bench press people off of you. Like you're going to have to perfect the technique of escaping side control or escaping mount. So it's really easier to teach people who aren't really strong and athletic. It's oftentimes easier to teach them than it is to teach a big, strong, athletic person. So as you're trying to learn jiu-jitsu, focus on perfecting the technique and not trying to power through it, where you see people get a technique like 70 or 80% right, and then the other 20%, they just use their athleticism and strength, and then they make it work. And then they're like, well, this technique works on purple belts and below, but it's not working on black belts and brown belts. Well, the reason it's not working on black belts and brown belts is because you're not doing the technique exactly right. So you want to get the technique exactly right. You initially will start off slow, getting each step exactly right. And then through repetition, you'll gain speed. But the first time you're doing a technique, don't think like, oh man, somebody just showed me a new way to hit an arm bar from, say, side control. Well, the first time you do it, it's not going to be fast. It's not going to be perfect. So focus on it being perfect each step. And then through repetition, your 10th repetition, you're going to be faster than your first one. Your 100th time doing this arm bar, you're going to be faster than your 10th one. Your 1,000th time doing this arm bar from side control, you're going to be faster than your 100th. And on. The more you rep it, especially if you're practicing perfectly, and then you're going to hit these moves and you're going to hit it really fast. But if you try to initially just hit it really fast and skip some steps or not do everything correctly, you're going to end up with a technique that's just not good, that's reliant on your athleticism, which will carry you to a degree until your opponent is just as athletic or more athletic or stronger than you. Now your 70% correct technique is now really lacking. So get the technique 100% correct, focus on that, and then worry about developing the speed. The other tip I would suggest is focus on, like, sometimes we joke in jiu-jitsu about your good side of doing the technique and your dark side, or the side you're not very good on, the awkward side. So maybe, you're good at doing it on your right side, but you're not good at doing it on your left side. You're more awkward. Well, focus on getting really good on your right side, whatever your strong side is. And then in time, get good on the other side too. And I've heard people say, like if you do 10 reps, you should do 5 on one side, 5 on the left, get good at both. And that's an interesting philosophy. My philosophy is, if you're in a fight or if you're in a tournament, you are going to go with your best side. And it's just like, say, shooting a pistol. Yeah, you should learn to shoot the pistol. If you're right-handed, shoot it with your right hand. And you should also learn to shoot it with your left hand. That's great. But if you're in a gunfight and you've got 10 shots, 10 shots to save your life, will you shoot 5 on your right dominant and then switch and shoot 5 on your left? Or will you shoot all 10 on your less dominant hand? Or are you going to take all 10 shots with your best hand? So if I'm right-handed, am I going to take all 10 shots with my right hand? Or am I going to take 10 with my left? And you know what the answer is. You're going to go with your best side. If your life is on the line, you're going to go with your best side. So when you're trying to learn a technique, especially if it's a brand new technique, don't strive to get it right on one side in class. And then you can practice more at home. You can practice and do reps with your training partners here in the gym. And, over time, you can get proficient at the other side also. But what I see new people do is let's say I show a new technique, and let's say they got time to do 10 reps. They'll do 5 on one side, and then they'll try to do 5 on the other. And what ends up happening is they leave, and they're equally bad at doing it on both sides. They really just don't have the technique down. So try to perfect it on one side. And if you want to be adventuresome, let's say and you want to learn it on, say, your weaker side, then let's say if I came in one day and I taught, like, say, the hip bump sweep. Say learn your hip bump sweep on your right side. And then if your left side is your weak side, and then the next sweep I show maybe is the scissor sweep. Learn the scissor sweep on your left side. So now you have a sweep for your right side and for your left side. 2 different sweeps, but you practice one on one side and the other on the other side, and now you can go either side. And maybe that's a way to approach. That might be. So that's a suggested way to consider approaching it. But focus on getting it right on one side and make that your goal in class. Whether we're talking about a sweep, an escape, a submission, a counter, focus on it being perfect. Don't worry about speed as you initially start. If you feel yourself using strength and power, you're doing it wrong. So don't try to power through the technique. Focus on getting the technique perfect, no matter how slow you have to go. Even if it looks like, man, I'm in slow motion, I'm hitting it perfect. So the end message is don't leave and be equally bad on both sides. And don't be in a hurry to do the technique poorly. Go slow, get it perfect. All right, that's this week's advice, the answer to this week's question. And somebody said I said something really wise in class, and they're like, what was that quote you said? And I'm like, man, I think I just made it up on the spot, and now I can't remember what I said. But the gist of it was, don't be in a hurry to do the technique wrong. Take your time, get the technique perfect. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you guys so much. Hope everybody had a great weekend. And as always, if you got a question for next week, post it in the comments or Facebook, or if you see me in class, and I'll give you the best answer I can, and maybe that'll be my question of the week for next week. All right, have a great week. Ciao.